Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm reading from the book Answers to Objections by Francis D. Nichols. It's an examination of major objections raised against the teachings of Seventh-Day Adventists. Today I read from Part 1, Section 1, which is about law, the second objection. Adventists seek to prove that there are two laws described in the Bible, one moral, the other ceremonial. But there is only one law. The logic of the objection is this: there is but one law. The Bible speaks clearly of a law abolished, therefore the Ten Commandments are abolished, including necessarily the fourth, on which Adventists build their case for the Sabbath. So much false reasoning has been reared on this one law doctrine that it must be considered at length. The word law is used in the Bible in a number of ways. In the phrase, the law and the prophets, the word law rather uniformly means the books of Moses, because in his writings the laws of God are specially set forth. The word law is sometimes used without reference to any particular code as a collective term to describe any and all laws. Again, the word law is often employed to designate a particular code, for example, the moral law or the ceremonial law, as we shall seek to show. To contend that every time the Bible uses the word law, it means the same code would be as reasonable as to contend that every time the Bible uses the word day, it means the same period of time. The facts are that day may mean 1. The light part of the 24-hour cycle, as day in contrast with night, or 2. The whole 24-hour period as 7 days in a week, or 3. An indefinite period of time as now is the day of salvation. What would we think of the man who reasoned that because certain texts in the Bible speak of the ending of the day, therefore the day of salvation has necessarily ended? The Bible does say that the law was abolished by Christ. See Ephesians 2:15. But Paul, who wrote that statement, also declares, "Do we, then, make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yeah, we establish the law." Romans 3:31. The contrast between the statements is sharpened when attention is called to the fact that Paul used the same Greek root for the words here translated abolished and make void. That root, katargeo, means to make inoperative, or to cause to cease, to do away with, annul, abolish. But did the inspired writer Paul say to one church that the law is abolished, and then to another church exclaim, "God forbid," at the very thought that the law is abolished, and refer to the same law in each instance? Obviously, Paul must be speaking of two different laws. These two texts are sufficient in themselves to expose the fallacy of the argument that the Bible speaks only of the one law. The first formal recording of any codes of divine laws for man was at the time of the Exodus. Then it was that God, who had chosen a people for his name, set them on their way to the promised land. The former centuries possessed no scriptures, for none of the 66 books of the Bible had been written. Through Moses, God began to give to men a written revelation to guide them, and from his day onward, with one striking exception, the words of God for man, including his laws for man, have been penned by human agents, the prophets. That one exception was a code of laws that God spoke to men with his own voice. Sacred history records no other sermon ever preached by God to man amid the supernatural, flaming glory that surrounds the eternal God. Referring to this lone majestic instance, Moses declared to Israel, "For ask now of the days that are past, which were before thee, since the day that God created man upon the earth, and ask from the one side of heaven unto the other, whether there has been any such thing as this great thing is, or has been heard like it. Did ever people hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as thou hast heard, and live?" Deuteronomy 4:32 and 33. And when God had spoken the code, the 10 Commandments, the record declares, he added no more. See Deuteronomy 4:13 and 5:22. The sermon was finished. It was a complete whole. There was nothing more that God desired to add. Then he wrote down the sermon with his own hand on 2 tablets of stone. Deuteronomy 5:22. On no other document in the history of man has the hand of God ever been inscribed. The tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tablets. Exodus 32:16. And what God wrote on those tablets of stone he described as a law. See Exodus 24:12. Then follows another dramatic moment, a sequel to the giving and the writing of this law. Moses started down from the mount with the 2 tables in his hands. He was bringing to Israel the permanent record of that awesome sermon by the God of heaven. His indignation at the sight of Israelites worshipping the golden calf caused him to dash the stones to earth and break them, a symbol of their breaking of the divine code. Did the Lord then command Moses to write a copy of the code to take the place of the broken tablets? No. The Lord wrote the 10 Commandments a second time on new tables of stone. A most distinctive code indeed, that God himself should write twice on the stone. He entrusted to his prophets many vital messages for men, but the 10 Commandments he wrote himself. The focal point, the most holy object of the religious service instituted by God for the Israelites, was the Ark of the Covenant, above which hovered the holy light of the presence of God. When, in the journeyings of the Israelites, the ark was to be moved, none were to touch it lest they die. And in that most sacred of the sacred objects of the sanctuary, Moses was instructed to place the tables of stone. Deuteronomy 10:5. Nor was any other code of laws placed within that sacred ark. There was nothing in the ark save the 2 tables of stone which Moses put there at Horeb. 1 Kings 8:9. Again, this code of laws was distinguished as the basis of a covenant between God and the Israelites. Those who oppose the scriptural doctrine of the perpetuity of the moral law, which Adventists believe, have sought to support their view with this fact. See objection 5. But what they have overlooked is this. The very fact that the 10 Commandment law is described as uniquely the basis of a covenant proves once more that the Decalogue is a distinct code, not to be confused with any other. Said Moses to Israel, God declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, even 10 Commandments, and he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. Deuteronomy 4:13. Let us summarize these historical facts concerning the giving of the 10 Commandment law. First, God spoke the law with his own voice in the hearing of all Israel. He gave no other law in that way. He added no more. Second, God wrote the 10 Commandment law with his own finger, the only law that he ever wrote out for man. Third, God wrote the law on stone, and himself prepared the stone. the only law of Bible record that was ever thus written. Fourth, God sent Moses down from the mount in the sight of all Israel, bearing the 2 tables of stone that contained only the 10 commandments. Fifth, God himself rewrote the law after Moses had broken the first tables. Sixth, God instructed Moses to place the tables within the Ark of the Covenant, the only law thus honored. Seventh, God declared that the 10 Commandment law was his covenant, the only law thus described. Yet objectors profess to be unable to find in the Bible any grounds for believing that the 10 Commandment law is a distinct code of laws, not to be confused with any other code. We would ask, if they could have dictated the manner of the giving of this law, and had wished to provide convincing proof that it was a law set apart, what procedure could they possibly have followed that would have set it apart more fully or more dramatically? But the 10 Commandment law was not the only